The sky was bleeding fire the day Earth fell. From the observation deck of Echelon, Tower, once the tallest structure on the Pacific frontier, Admiral Elias Thorne watched helplessly as alien dreadnoughts ignited Earth's last line of orbital defense. Human voices screamed through fractured comms, desperate, chaotic, final. Sparks rained like stardust over New Santiago below, where the city's evacuation had failed hours ago. They weren't just losing. Humanity was being erased. Thorne clenched his jaw, the tremor in his left cybernetic arm pulsing in sync with the impact shocks. He'd been forged in war, raised in trenches, and trained in vacuum. He wasn't built to watch from a window. Status of Dawnspear, he barked Commander Vela. Isen didn't look up from the console. Still cloaked, still intact. They haven't found it yet. The Dawnspire, Earth's last miracle. Not a weapon, but a sanctuary, a hidden city, carved beneath the Andes. Self-sustaining, built from 100 shattered nations' final hopes. It held the last uncorrupted AI, 10,000 civilians, and the one thing the aliens couldn't replicate, human imagination. And it was now the last city on Earth. They will, Thorne said quietly. Soon, he turned to Vela, her eyes as cold as the void beyond. They had fought side by side for over 2 decades on moons, in asteroid belts, and during the siege of Ceres. She was brilliant, brutal, and unshakable. We have to move the city, he said. Vela blinked. That's not possible. It is, Thorne replied. Just once. The Dawnspire's design was theoretical genius built, with repulsor lift anchors and deep earth kinetic tunnels. It could rise. It was never meant to. But if it didn't now, it never would. We rise at dawn. She stared at him for a long moment before nodding. An hour later. In the command hall beneath the Andes, Thorne stood before the Council of Last Lights, scientists, engineers, a poet, a boy no older than 12, who inherited his mother's vote after she died in the supply raids. Everyone looked tired. Everyone looked afraid, except one, her Dr. Saren Kale. Chief architect of the Dawnspire, had eyes like dusk gold, flecked with a mind that danced between logic and fury. She hadn't spoken to Thorne in 2 years, not since their affair. Collapsed under the weight of war. Now she spoke with fire. You're asking us to detonate the anchors of the only habitable zone left on Earth, Saren said. To rise into the atmosphere, exposed, with no planetary defenses and no landing plan. I'm asking us to live, Thorne replied. She stood. The repulsors haven't been tested. The core will destabilize. The reactors could melt through the whole basin. We're not a city. We're a tomb waiting to collapse. Then we either collapse under our own weight, Thorne said, or we rise trying. The room fell into silence. The boy raised his hand, his voice barely a whisper. My mom said if we stop trying, we stop being human. The vote passed 7-5. The countdown began. They called it the Ascension Protocol, a poetic name for an act of desperation. Saren oversaw the sequence, hands trembling over ancient keys and haptic fields. Thorne stood beside her, silent, the tension between them thicker than the ion-charged air. I don't forgive you, she murmured. I know, he said. I still remember the way you looked at me when we lost Europa. You chose the mission over me. I chose humanity. She didn't respond, but she didn't walk away. The first quake struck at 5:01 a.m. The mountain groaned like a beast awakening. Below, the city shuddered, lights flickering as centuries of buried tech hummed alive. By 5:06, the anchors blew. It wasn't an explosion, it was a release. Pressure, energy, memory. The Dawnspire groaned, creaked, then moved. The city rose. Stone broke, ice cracked. Entire forests split as the mountain's hidden crown lifted skyward on streams of blue-white plasma. Civilians screamed. Children clutched their parents. Wind howled through the fractured airlocks. And in the center of it all, Thorn stood unmoving, watching the world fall away, watching humanity take flight. The city screamed as it rose. Metal groaned like thunder. Trees exploded from shifting tectonics. Entire flocks of birds scattered into the dawn sky, their wings silhouetted against plasma thrust. From the outside, it must have looked like a miracle, an entire metropolis rising from the mountains, wrapped in ash and light. From the inside, it felt like hell. Saren gripped the edge of the core console, white knuckle. Reactor readings pulsed across her HUD voltage spikes, repulsor overload, radiation bleed. We're unstable. She shouted over the roar. We're rising too fast. If we breach Atma like this, we'll tear the dome apart. Stabilize the ascent, Thorn barked. Trim the outer boosters. Booster controls are locked. Before he could reply, a flare of golden light erupted in the distance, then another dot, and another. They've seen us, Vela said from the upper platform. Her voice was low, steady, fatal. 3 alien warships shimmered into view serpent-like. Cruisers cloaked in refracted gravity, their hulls glinting with violet energy. The same species that had reduced Earth's orbitals to burning shrapnel. Machines with minds that hunted. They're coming, Vela whispered. The dawn spire cleared the Andes at 6,000 meters. Wind battered the outer domes. Plasma flares hissed against pressure shields. Inside, citizens scrambled to secured chambers. The boy from the council, his name was Kieran, watched through a viewport, eyes wide. Are those the ones who burned the stars? He asked. Thorn kneeled beside him. No, these are smaller. Scouts, but they're just as cruel. Kieran looked up. Then we burn brighter. Thorn couldn't help it, he smiled. In the command center, Saren had overridden the boosters manually, slicing power into a controlled cascade. It was madness. She was literally throttling a city's propulsion system with analog overrides, but somehow, it worked. The shaking steadied. We can make orbit, she said, breathless. But we'll be open sky for at least 20 minutes, Vela replied. We're a beacon, a floating target. Saren turned to Thorn. We need shields, but we can't power both them and propulsion. Thorn stared at the central column. The power core was humming violently, now barely contained fusion, held together by hope and protocols. We kill the lights, he said. All non-essential systems. You mean black out the city? Yes. Make us a shadow. Let the sun blind them. There was a pause, then Saren nodded. Okay. 10 seconds later, the city went dark. A silence fell across the dome. Streetlights dimmed. Screens flickered off. Elevators froze mid-floor. Only the hum of plasma kept the city from falling. Outside, the sun broke the horizon, casting golden fire across the mist-smeared dome. The aliens descended. 3 cruisers, fast and precise. Targets locking, Vela warned. Thorn stared at the central screen, where the enemy blips were converging. He did the math. They'd intercept just before the dawn spire cleared the thermosphere. Then we meet them halfway, he said. Vela tilted her head. How? He pointed to the old launch grid, the one sealed since the orbital exodus. Open. Base 7. I'm flying out. Saren stood sharply. You'll be vaporized in 10 seconds. I only need 5. She stared at him. Why is it always you? Because I still owe humanity a win. The hangar roared as Base 7 opened. Thorn stepped into his old EVA armor, a relic from Mars reclamation, patched with field welds and battle scars. He strapped into a jagged, experimental fighter, half prototype, half suicide mission. You don't need to do this, Saren said softly from behind him. I do, Thorn replied, because they'll hit the dome, and we don't have anything else to throw at them. She stepped forward, touched his visor, then burned like we were meant to. He hesitated, then kissed her forehead through the glass. Tell Kieran, I remembered. His words. Thorn launched at 6:15 a.m. The fighter tore through the upper air like a blade, cold, violent, brilliant. Above, the cruisers closed in. They fired. Thorn weaved, dodged, then punched through their formation straight into the belly of the lead ship. His vessel exploded in a searing burst of light and magnetic disruption. One cruiser blinked out, but the cost was immediate. The second cruiser adjusted course. Its plasma coils began to glow. Dome shields at 40%, Saren yelled. We can't take another hit. Vela cursed. They'll breach before we hit orbit. Then, without warning, the cruiser exploded. Not from within, but from behind. A second human fighter, old and cracked but fast, streaked through the debris. It was Kieran, 12 years old, in a stolen shuttle, screaming across the void, for Admiral Thorn. His voice echoed through open COMM's dot, and somehow the cruiser fell. 2 minutes later, the Dawnspire cleared the stratosphere, and above the clouds, they saw it. Earth, curved and broken, and the headstars unclaimed. They floated above a broken Earth. The Dawnspire now drifted in low orbit, its glowing undercarriage a pale ember against the void. The Earth below was unrecognizable oceans, churned black, continents scorched, the scars of orbital bombardments, still glowing along tectonic seams. Inside the city, silence reigned, not from fear, from reverence. They had done the impossible. They had risen, but survival had bought them only a moment, and moments end. Damage report, Saren said, her voice still hoarse. Main dome stabilized, Vela replied. Shield array at 12%. Reactor is holding, but we've got less than 30 minutes of life support without a new energy source. Our orbit's decaying. Saren stared at the holomap. If we fall back into Atma, we won't make it a second time, Vela finished. Saren's hand curled into a fist. Her gaze drifted toward the darkened VIEWPORT. No Thorn, no Kieran, both gone to buy them another breath, but their sacrifices had left them teetering on the edge. She made her way alone through the city's upper corridors still flickering from partial shutdown. It felt like walking through a cathedral of ghost shadows of people who still lived, still breathed, still loved. Children curled beside exhausted parents, scientists slumped over consoles, artists drawing in dust. Hope hadn't died, but it was wounded. She reached the rooftop deck of the solarium, a greenhouse platform now half shattered by their ascent. There, at the edge of the city's dome, she sat cross-legged and let the silence fill her. A memory surfaced, Thorn's voice. We weren't meant to stay here, not really. We were always meant to keep moving. That's what makes us human. We go where no maps reach. An alert chimed. Back in command, Vela leaned over the main console. A ping, repeating, weak, but constant. Saren, she called through the comms. We're getting something. Deep space transmission, not alien. Saren bolted from the solarium, sliding down the rails toward the lower control deck. Patch it through. The static resolved into a voice, human male. This is Captain Jonas Reeve of the Solstice Echo. We received your burst signal. We're inbound from Saturn Titan Outpost. Brace for block. We're bringing you home. Vela's breath caught. Titan. Saren nearly collapsed. They're alive. 2 hours later, a silhouette emerged from the stars. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't pretty. But the Solstice Echo was real human-made, retrofitted for deep space exploration, covered in Saturn dust and burned scars. And it was fast. It docked on the northern spire of the Dawnspire. The city trembled under the magnetic clamp. A hatch opened. Figures emerged, humans alive, from the outer colonies. Jonas Reeve was tall, gried, skin toughened by radiation and time. He looked around, stunned. You brought a city into space, he whispered. Saren nodded. We had no choice. You made the right one. That night, beneath the fractured dome of stars, Saren briefed the survivors. We have enough tech to stabilize the city. Titan has power cores, farming systems, medical AI. They've survived off-world for years. They have knowledge we don't. But we have something they need. She tapped her chest. Imagination. Grit. The madness that builds cities in the sky. She looked out at the crowd. Engineers, musicians, refugees, fighters. We're going to Titan, and we're not arriving as beggars. She raised her hand. We're arriving as proof. The journey would take 19 days. During that time, the Dawnspire would travel further from Earth than most of its people had ever dreamed. Past orbital wreckage, past silent satellites, past the bones of humanity's failed empires. On the 6th day, a child was born aboard the city. On the 11th day, the gardens bloomed somehow, despite everything. On the 14th day, they found escape pod. It had shielded him. The boy was alive. On the 17th day, Saren found Thorn's name etched into the cockpit wall of Bay 7. For her. For all of them. As they neared Titan's orbit, the stars opened wide like a doorway. The Dawnspire, city of survivors, burned gently against the darkness scarred. Half-patched, glowing with stolen light. It was no longer just a city. It was a declaration. They saw Titan before they felt its gravity. A dull amber sphere wreathed in methane haze, its rings casting long shadows across the ice. But beneath that shroud, in a buried crater, warmed by geothermal veins, humanity's last outpost pulsed like a heartbeat. The Titan Enclave. Jonas. Reeve called it the Forge, a city built of scavenged colony wrecks, retrofitted mining rigs, and melted Mutzvar. It wasn't beautiful, but it was alive. And it welcomed the Dawnspire. Like kin long thought lost, the docking was chaos. Crowds pressed against the magnetic gates as the two cities connected. The first to cross the threshold was Kieran, barefoot, wrapped in a thermal blanket, blinking at the synthetic sun of Titan's atrium. Behind him came Vila, then engineers, civilians, families torn from Earth's corpse, now stepping into another impossible dream. Saren stayed at the back of the procession, hand resting over the command tablet on her hip. Every corridor she walked through was another reminder of what had been lost, and what had survived. Inside Titan's control chamber, she met the council, and the news hit like a hammer. There's a fleet on the outer edge of the system, Jonas said, voice low. Same species? They've been harvesting from Saturn's rings, pulling energy, minerals. Maybe worse. They've got numbers. Vela crossed her arms. How long do we have? Maybe 10 days? Maybe less. But they're not blind. They'll see us, and they'll come. Saren's mind raced. We can't outrun them again. Not twice. Jonas nodded grimly. Then we don't run. He gestured to a wall projection, a lattice of reactor cores, railguns, drones, shield arrays, and defensive satellites. You brought us a miracle, Saren. A floating city with tech we've never seen. You have fusion systems. We have weapons. You have shielding. We have orbital mines. You have heart. He paused, looking her straight in the eyes. And we have fury. The alliance began that hour. Dawnspire tech was grafted to Titan's infrastructure. AI systems synchronized. Farmers became engineers. Children ran cables. Old soldiers rebuilt railguns. Pain became fuel. Memory became armor. And the city changed. No longer passive. No longer fleeing. It became a fortress. Kieran worked beside Saren. Now, always at her side. He asked questions she didn't have time to answer about gravity fields, about electromagnetic bloom, about Thorn. He died saving us, she told him finally. He flew straight into death so we could reach the stars. Kieran thought for a long time, then simply said, then we light fires in his name. That night, the sky above Titan flickered with thousands of ignition flares as engineers tested thruster arrays, shield blooms, and plasma spears. The stars blinked with fire. On the 6th day, the alien fleet arrived, 32 vessels, not scouts, carriers, harvesters, planet killers. They didn't send a message. They didn't demand surrender. They simply descended. But this time, humanity didn't wait. The first strike came from a rigged mining station near Saturn's equator. A ghost signal lured in a scout vessel, and a plasma coil detonated its core. Then came a burst of kinetic torpedoes from Titan's under-ice bunkers. The invaders reeled. That was when the Dawnspire moved. Saren had designed the repulsor grid as a life-saving measure. But now, reprogrammed with Titan's weapon data, the city launched itself into low orbit like a flaming blade. From the southern arc, railguns fired bursts that shattered asteroid-sized cruisers. Vela flew in a tactical pod, leading squadrons of pilots that danced like sparks between the burning stars. And at the heart of it all, Saren hands flying across the interface. Mind synced to the AI core. Voice raw as she called out commands to thousands across 2 cities. Anchor formation. 3. Redirect all coolant to Shield Bloom Delta. Fire phase cannons in overlapping sequence. The Dawnspire shook with purpose. One of the alien carriers broke formation and began a suicide dive toward the city. Saren hesitated, then saw Kieran standing in the observation window, watching it descend. She hit the manual override. The entire forward platform of the Dawnspire launched, detaching and driving forward with all the fusion left in its veins. It collided with the alien ship in midair and exploded, a star-splitting light. The sky went white. For a moment, there was silence. Then from the blackness, through the sparks and debris, the voice of Kieran crackled through. I'm alive, still here. The final cruiser veered off. The invaders retreated. The stars grew quiet. The war was not over, but it had paused, because for the first time, the invincible had been wounded, and in the heart of a reborn solar system, a city made of memory and fire still floated scarred, burning, and alive. 3 days after the battle, the stars were still burning. Wreckage from the alien fleet drifted like dying embers across Titan's orbit-twisted hulls. Cracked reactors, fragments of species that once believed humanity would kneel, but the city's Dawnspire and Titan Forge still stood, bruised, glorious, defiant, and from their wounds, something began to rise, something new. Saren stood at the top of the Dawnspire's central tower, looking out at the galaxy through a fractured viewport. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from release. The war had spared her body, but it had broken something inside. She had seen Thorn's face in every burst of light, had heard his voice when she closed her eyes. Keep going, Saren, even if I don't. Now, the voice was gone. But something else remained. Legacy, Kiran, sat beside her, silent. He wore a patch on his jacket, now the crest of the Dawnspire, stitched by hand. He'd grown in days, not in height, but in presence. Like the fire of survival had aged him. They're calling it a victory, he said. Saren gave a half-smile. It is. But they'll come back. Yes. He looked up. What happens when they do? She turned to him. Then we build something so bright, they can't even look at us without burning. In the great halls of Titan, the survivors gathered. There was no anthem, no speech, just people, thousands standing, shoulder to shoulder, as engineers lit the new reactor core with a burst of blue-white fusion. One by one, the lights across both cities flared to life. A young girl played a violin made of scavenged metal. An old woman told stories in 6 languages. A blind boy planted seeds in a fresh greenhouse pod. Humanity wasn't rebuilding. It was becoming. The council met in private soon after. Jonas, Reeve, Vela, Saren, engineers, artists, children, soldiers, together. They designed a declaration not of war, but of presence. They would not hide. They would expand, not to dominate, but to prove that stars are not the property of conquerors. They belonged to those who reached for them, not with greed, but with hope. The Dawnspire, now fused with Titan's systems, began to grow. They called it the Everlight Project, a plan to spread the reborn humanity across moons, belts, and distant planets, using hybrid tech and human creativity. The core would remain here, orbiting Saturn, but new cities would rise, each named for those they lost, each lit by the fires they carried forward. Saren stood. One last time in Bay 7, the cockpit had been rebuilt. Thorn's name was still etched into the wall. But now, beneath it, a new line. He died to lift us. Now we rise for all. She pressed her hand to the cold glass, closed her eyes, and whispered goodbye. The alien fleet did return decades later, but the humans they found were not fractured or hiding. They found cities in orbit around Neptune, found satellites wrapped in art and metal poetry, found languages that pulsed in holograms, found laughter that echoed even in the void. And when they struck, the humans struck back, not out of vengeance, but because they refused to fall again. The legend of the Dawnspire became more than history. It became gospel, a story told to children who asked, "Did we really build a city that could fly?" And parents would smile and say, "We didn't just build it. We lit it with everything we had left." And so the city rose, with fire in its veins, with memory in its steel, with the names of the fallen etched into every corridor. And when the sun crested the edge of Saturn, casting gold across its shielded glass dome, it became more than a miracle. It became a promise that dawn always follows, even the darkest sky, and humanity always finds a way. And the city that rose with the dawn, a human legacy forged in fire and memory,